chick flicks, romantic comedies, rom-coms. You love them, you hate them, but we are here to eviscerate them. Welcome to the RomCom Killjoys podcast. I'm your host, Jonelle Walker. Now, let's get on with some feminist joy killing. A sad tale's best for winter. I have one of sprites and goblins. This is one of my favorite lines from William Shakespeare's A Winter's Tale, and when he wrote it, he was thinking about the ghost stories that are often told in the British Isles at Christmas, and he definitely was not thinking about the film that we're talking about this week. Here to talk with me about this supremely spooky Christmas rom-com, a genre that we heretofore have not bridged, is my friend Sarah Ryan. Sarah, tell the people about yourself.
I am Sarah Ryan. I met Jonelle in college when we were super cool Shakespeare friends. I still live in DC where we went to college. I work in healthcare, so the past couple of months have been a little wild, and it was nice to have a little escape to snowy... Do they ever say where they are? Vermont, I think?
They don't. It's implied that it's Vermont or New Hampshire or some New England area that I'm not familiar with.
Yes. Snowy New England. So it was lovely to have a little escape, not to mention the fact that it's been 90 degrees in DC for 100 days straight. And apparently will be for another 100 days straight, based on my reading of the calendar. Very, very happy to fly up to New England and spend a couple of hours in the snow.
I'm glad that we could do that for you. We, similarly, since it's Texas, we have also been deep in the heat. So I was very, very happy to see all of that snow, although it did make me a little wistful. I was like, I don't know when I'm ever going to see that snow again, if ever. So goodbye, hello, goodbye to the snow. What is the name of the film that we're discussing this week?
The name of the film that we're discussing this week is The Spirit of Christmas, which is a pun, as all the best Christmas movie titles are. Because this movie is about a spirit who brings back the spirit of Christmas to your classic trope of cold career woman who hates the holidays.
That's a very apt summary, thank you. Yes, the year of our Lord 2015, the spirit of Christmas, the way Amazon summarizes it is 12 days before Christmas, Kate, our cold professional woman, is trying to close the sale of a historic inn, only to find Daniel, the sexy French-Canadian tall man, the ghost of a man who died a century ago and needs her help to unravel the mystery of his annual holiday haunting. All right, Sarah, so this is what Amazon says the film is about. But if you could elaborate for us, if you could really, dive in with those liberal arts degree analysis skills, what would you say the spirit of Christmas is really about?
I mean, I think it's really about misunderstanding a lot of things about Christmas, the 1920s, New England. To start with, the Amazon summary misses the extremely anachronistic haircut of our leading man, who looks like a hipster from Brooklyn and not at all like a rum runner from the 1920s, which is allegedly what he is.
There is a pretty remarkable scene in this film for people who, for some reason, have not seen it, where Daniel, the ghost of the rum runner, hosts a somewhat inexplicable sort of like cocktail evening at his inn, or his former inn, the inn he now haunts, where he makes a variety of slings and martinis, etc. And it is in that moment that you realize, yes, this film was made in 2015, when the 1920s anachronistic bartender look was the rage in Brooklyn. And if you happen to be a tall and handsome French-Canadian man, all the better. So indeed, Sarah, I think you're right. That haircut encapsulates so much that is wrong about this movie, that is about misconceptions in a variety of directions. And maybe we should start with its misconceptions towards Christmas.
Yes, this movie highlights one of my biggest pet peeves in Christmas movies, which one of the reasons that I know you and your compatriot Eliza is also that I went to church with Eliza in college because we were extremely cool kids. And this movie highlights the 12 days of Christmas, but in the worst, most inconsistent way possible. For those who aren't aware, the 12 days of Christmas are starting on Christmas, going to Epiphany, which is January 6th, 12 days counting past Christmas. But many a Christmas movie likes to go leading up to Christmas with the 12 days. This movie references 12 days a lot. That's how long Daniel comes back to life every year leading up to Christmas. But it never really connects it to the 12 days of Christmas, even though it's a glaringly obvious connection, and they play the song several times throughout the movie. Instead, it's how long he was in Canada before he got murdered on his way back on Christmas Eve. And it just really, it's one of the many loose ends that this movie never quite ties up in a consistent or clear way.
Yes, it is one of my favorite lines of dialogue in the film when about a third of the way through the movie they're talking about this exact thing, because part of the tension of the plot, listeners, if you want to call it that, is trying to figure out who killed Daniel and why on that fateful Christmas Eve in 1920. And our hero, or our heroine, Kate, who is an attorney, is enumerating all the reasons why the 12 days of his curse when he comes back to the inn might very well be relevant and important. And when she gets to the end of it, Daniel says, "But what does that have to do with anything? What could it mean?" And Kate says, "I don't know, but it seems significant."
Like so many things that they toss out that could be significant throughout this movie. The plot starts with Kate heading up to this inn that she has to sell as a fancy Boston lawyer for a trust now that all of the heirs to the inn have died out. She shows up and all the appraisers have been scared off by the inn's ghost. And suddenly the ghost materializes in the most literal fashion. Part of the conceit of this is it's not your Christmas Carol ghost who whisks you away for a few hours and is incorporeal and ethereal. It's just a dude who's fully solid and human and eats but doesn't sleep for whatever reason for 12 days. I don't understand why he doesn't sleep. He says it's because he doesn't want to waste the time, but he just sits up all night staring at Kate like a creep. And sleeping is awesome. And he says that that's why he eats food, because food is delicious. So, not really sure what's going on there, but one of the many inconsistencies. And then they're trying to solve this mystery, and they don't really do a lot to solve the mystery until the very end of the movie, when Kate gets a document from, I guess, the trust that makes no sense as well. So while Daniel is off in Canada running rum at the end of December, whatever year it is that he dies, his fiancée is waiting at home for him, very angry that he's running rum, and apparently secretly pregnant. So when he dies, his brother, out of honor, marries this woman who the brother has had a secret, not actually that secret, but unrequited love for. And Daniel's very angry about this. It's really hurt his feelings. He doesn't know somehow, despite the fact that he's come back to this inn for 12 days for like 90 years, that his wife and child died when the wife was in childbirth, shortly after the marriage, and that it probably was his kid, which is confirmed at the end of the movie on a birth certificate, which makes absolutely no sense, given why would you have a secret marriage to hide your shameful pregnancy from a premarital sex with your now dead rum-running fiance, and then put his name on the birth certificate? That's not how birth certificates work.
Yes, I want to give a shout out to Daniel's fiance, his long dead fiance and mother of his child, Lily, who is the longest suffering character of this entire film. Because the thing about this is that she is dead a year after the inciting incidents of this plot. And yet she created, spoilers, this entire curse, question mark, to ensure that he would have a lovely afterlife where he could maybe come back after being murdered and join her in eternity. But he says, "Nah, I'm good."
Yeah, and stays with the woman he's just met. So the climax of the movie, at the Christmas party, the annual Christmas Eve ball that's being held at the end for reasons that are completely irrelevant, but sort of drove the plot along so that it would happen at the inn, Daniel just stares off into space and starts hallucinating his dead fiance, dead cousin, spoilers, he's the murderer, and suddenly has a revelation based on nothing except hallucinations, I guess? and realizes that his cousin murdered him. And Lily always loved him. She didn't love his brother at all. And he could go live happily ever after. But nah, I'm gonna stay with this woman I've known for 12 days instead of my beautiful fiance who's waited for me for a century. It makes no sense.
I feel like I have to believe there's an earlier version of this script where Lily turned out to be a double crosser and someone just decided that that was way too dark for this Hallmark Light Christmas movie. Because, and Sarah, I would love to know your thoughts on this. The way that the actress portrays Lily, she has, I think, what could be charitably called a resting bitch face. And I say this in the critical form with all of those words capitalized, where what it, I believe is trying to be communicated to us is that she's duplicitous. And yet, at the end, we're supposed to believe that she was the good guy all along. And I was confused by that.
Yeah, she's definitely not played as a good guy, and she doesn't appear in the film for that long. There are a few flashbacks to Daniel's original life, meeting her. She definitely has the kind of frigid bitch vibe that is so frequent in these movies, intended to portray this woman is bad. She's pretty but mean. You shouldn't like her. And so I think that that's actually a great theory that they changed the plot during either editing of the script or possibly even making the movie, given how confusing her portrayal is, because she's not portrayed sympathetically in the slightest. But at the end, she just says, okay, you can come with me. I did this all because I loved you and I wanted you to be happy and know the truth. Why he couldn't just have died and gone to heaven or wherever she is and found out the truth is never explained. The mythology of this movie is not thoroughly developed, shall we say. But yeah, she's not a sympathetic character.
Yeah, you're right. The mythology of this movie is strange. It's shockingly, as you pointed out very astutely, neither Christian nor traditionally sort of Christmassy a la A Christmas Carol sort of lore. So it is strange to think about what this film is trying to base its mythology off of, if it's trying to start a new kind of Christmas mythology, because there was a part of me, like with so many of these movies, where I kept thinking, like, if you look at this from a certain angle, it's kind of horrifying. I mean, at least for Daniel and Lily's plot, because in some sense, you could think of it like, well, Lily has given Daniel another chance at life, potentially, question mark, or he has damned him to a horrifying existence of constantly regenerating at different times for 12 days only at Christmas so that he can slowly watch his family die. It kind of is dark if you think about it from that direction.
It is. Well, and Daniel even says in the movie at one point, Kate asks him, what is it like for you the rest of the year? And he says that it's horrible, that the other 350 days of the year are like torture. And he's come back year after year. He locks himself away in this inn that shuts down every year because if they don't, he appears to in some way torment the guests, not necessarily in a cruel way, but just is disruptive enough that the guests don't want to stay, so the inn can't stay open during the holidays. And he just sits and pouts, essentially, which, frankly, I think is a little understandable. I also like to be left alone so I can just eat and not have to talk to people. But she really doesn't give him a lot to work with until 100 years later, this woman, Kate, shows up and says, let me help you fix your problems and we'll figure this out. And then 12 days later, he hallucinates the answer.
Yeah, let's talk about the role that Kate plays in this story, because as you mentioned, she fulfills in this otherwise quite kind of strange, because this is my first ghost boyfriend rom-com. I'm sure that there are several of them that I'm not thinking of at this time. But she does fulfill a more common trope in this like ghost boyfriend plot, ghost boyfriend / Christmas plot, that is much more common, which is the cold, loveless career woman who doesn't know how to love because she had a traumatic childhood. What was your sense of Kate as a character? Because in that first scene, I felt actually quite moved by her honesty. In the first scene, she's broken up with by the guy she's currently dating, and she says, "Thank God, I thought you were going to propose to me. I don't know how to love. Every man I've ever dated tells me I don't know how to love, so this is a huge relief to me." And in that moment, I was like, wow, that's kind of refreshing. It's a little bit of a misdirection with how these movies usually go. But then over time, I realized that they weren't quite lampshading her character as much as I thought they were going to initially.
Yeah, I think actually the first scene in the movie kind of represents to me all of what it could have been with actually a really good writing team and good direction. The first scene for me is almost funny, but not quite. It just doesn't quite hit the right notes of her reaction and him being insulted or unsure. She just keeps eating his food, and it's just a little too drawn out for me. But I agree. I think that she starts out kind of as this self-aware character about her fulfilling this trope. You know, her boss wants to send her up to this inn to sell right before the holidays. And she says, "Oh, well, it's because I always don't do anything for Christmas." But later in the movie, she talks about how much her mom loved Christmas and how she always had a Christmas tree for her mom. And it's just one more area where Kate is not an especially developed person, in that we never hear any more about her mother or what kind of trauma led her to withdraw from the holidays or not spend time with her family or whatever it is. She just is. She just works all the time. It's the only personality trait she has, which I think is common for women um, fulfilling this trope in this type of movie, is that is their personality. They work all the time, and they hate the holidays in small towns. But I did think that that's one area where it doesn't dive deeply into the trope that it could have, which is the kind of small town hatred. She seems pretty charmed by the small town and happy to engage with them early on, and that's never a big point of conflict the way it sometimes is in these stories where she wants to run back to the big city. She does go back to the city for work eventually, but with the promise that she will come back. And I thought that was a little interesting. But again, they could have really run with that, and they just don't.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things about Kate that I found really thought provoking is that she did sort of take to this ideal small town New England life, and also that the idea of this ghost boyfriend being her ideal mate at the end, that's what we're being told. He's sort of her um, beloved, her ultimate man, was really intriguing to me on a symbolic level. Like, I kept thinking, like, what is the significance of having a dead boyfriend from another time? Because I know that trope does come up in a lot of these rom-coms. It is such a thing. Like, I kept thinking about Twilight and like Tuck Everlasting, but it's so weirdly contrasted with this idea of this ultra modern, ultra contemporary woman. So, I mean, certainly he's quite handsome and grumpy, and that's a combination that I am deeply attracted to. But I do wonder what the film is trying to tell us here by setting up an ultra modern, super, independent career woman with this old fashioned dead guy.
Yeah, I think that's another direction that the film really could have chosen to go in and doesn't. Daniel makes kind of offhand comments at certain points about how he knows times are different now, and women are different, they work or they can be the pursuers in relationships, but it never becomes a point of conflict between him and Kate, or anyone else for that matter. He never seems to fully embrace it either. It's not a question of, I've really moved into the 21st century during my 12 days a year that I get to spend with the living, and embraced this new modern way of living. And so it's just a undeveloped potential conflict, potential interesting path to go down that never quite gets there, as Daniel just acknowledges it and then moves on immediately. It is interesting that this version of ghost boyfriend mythology doesn't have that aging process, because he's only alive for 12 days a year, and as far as we can tell, for the last several decades he's spent those 12 days being grouchy and eating by himself. He doesn't get that wisdom and aged experience that tropes like a Twilight vampire who's hundreds of years older than you and has seen the world even though he looks like your age gets. And because he can't leave the property, he's not even interacting with the outside world. Even aside from his choice to isolate himself and just be grumpy, he can't go anywhere. He can't interact with new people. So he doesn't gain that life experience that your vampire boyfriend gets.
That's kind of sketchy, isn't it? Like it's almost like the ghost boyfriend part of the appeal is that he's yours and yours alone. Like he's almost like a captive boyfriend, which wow, that is also kind of scary.
But that gives it some of that comfort of like it's just mine, but also in the sense of I don't have to defend this to anyone else. It's private in the way that teenagers come back to school in the fall and say, "Oh yeah, I had a boyfriend from 2 states over, but none of you will ever meet him because he doesn't actually exist."
Yeah, I wanted a lot more from Daniel's sort of old fashionedness. It's sort of funny, like you say, how he, instead of having like an actual period appropriate haircut, and let's all be clear, everyone, I mean, we're theater nerds, like I get it that we pay attention to this more than a lot of people, but the period costumes in this film are so egregiously wrong. Like it's actually like horrible that I noticed because I'm not even that eagle-eyed about it. But I did find his dialogue to be kind of hilarious in how stilting it was with its anachronisms. Like, how he kept calling the cell phone a special device.
Yeah, he's never it's very hard to place him at a point in time. He as easily could have been a Civil War soldier as a World War I soldier, which apparently he was. The costumes don't make a ton of sense. And one of the first shots of Kate as she, quote unquote meets Daniel is her coming to this inn, looking around and picking up his photograph that sits, I think, on a mantle or something in the inn. And it looks like a black and white hipster photograph that would be on any Brooklyn bars Meet Our Staff page. It's just so glaringly obvious that this is not a man from the 1920s or any era before 2010. And it sticks out the whole way through. And he again never quite um, hits that mark. He doesn't have the mannerisms of someone from the 1920s. He doesn't use slang of someone from the 1920s. It just they don't lean into that as much as I wish they would, because that could be a really fun path to go down. I think the only scenes that they do is really the one that you referenced earlier, where he defends his honor that someone said that maybe he's not a good bartender by throwing a party and making a bunch of prohibition style cocktails, and then they get into it a little bit, but otherwise it's just not a thing. And I guess the only possible explanation that you could come up with for that is, well, they weren't in New York City or Chicago. They were in rural New England. Maybe the trends weren't quite as caught up there. Maybe things were a little more behind. But even the clothes, Lily, his dead fiance, wears such fun clothes. Why not lean into that? But they just choose not to.
Yeah, I can appreciate that the film was just like, fuck it, general ghostliness. I don't know, something that looks like vaguely post Civil War and pre World War II. We'll figure it out. It'll be fine. Lily is full on wearing a belly pock dress from the 1890s. It would have been more in place in Europe than the United States, and you know what? Sure, why not? It is sort of, like you said, it's sort of funny the way that he talks about his own time, especially with regards to alcohol, because he's so proud of his bartending skills, but he's also so like hesitant and ashamed of his quote unquote rum running to the point that he won't refer to it as bootlegging. So the film's also sense of his sort of like old fashioned morals are kind of intriguing. They're not really used as they could have been as a way to contrast against Kate's modern values, for example.
Yeah, I think that one of the things, as you were saying that really strikes me about this movie is that for so much of the movie, it really does lack a central conflict. At various points, Kate is arguing with her boss, who wants her to hurry up and sell the place and come back to the city so he can continue to, work her and get as much out of her during the holidays while everyone else is gone. And they're kind of haphazardly trying to figure out how to keep Daniel alive and how he was murdered, or let him move on, whatever it is that they're trying to help release him from. They're not super specific about that. But it just doesn't have a driving central conflict that they develop. And there are so many places, as we talk, that they could have gone with this conflict between his time and her time, more conflict between her desire to work think that's one of the other places that they kind of shy away from fully leaning into that trope is Kate likes her job. She seems very good at it, but she's not dying to get away from the inn to go back to the city and get her big promotion. She just kind of wants to hang out. Um, and they just never quite find that piece that is drives people's actions and creates a cohesive plot.
So do you think in the place of a plot, is there a central message or a central idea that this movie is trying to get across? I think there might be one deep in there, but I want to get at it with you.
I think that it does look at ideas of some of the kind of general Christmas themes of belonging and love. I think the one side plot that I really do enjoy is the caretaker of the inn and his budding girlfriend who owns the town bar that is vaguely related to the plot that gets them to have the holiday dance at the inn. But Walter and Molly are their names, and they really are charming, and I think they have pretty decent chemistry for this low budget Hallmark style movie. Um, and they have a nice kind of romance that comes together in the end. But I don't know that it has a message that I really think is well articulated, at least.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that if they had worked a little harder at it, the Molly and Walter plot parallel to the Kate and Daniel plot, like if I were writing this screenplay, I would think about this idea of like not having enough time and running out of time, and how time is both incredibly long and torturous and also short and brief, and how love and Christmas can help us like change our perceptions of time. So like if Kate had felt like she was running out of time to find love, or she didn't have time in her life for love, then something about Daniel's sort of like weird snow globe life would have been like an interesting prize for her. Like, oh well, she's a woman who doesn't have any time, and he's a guy who has nothing but time. And then Walter and Molly are two people who found love like later in life after divorces and failed relationships and thinking they were running out of time, but they weren't. They had the time all along. I think that could have been in there, but you're right. Like the film just never quite puts those what could have been those beautiful pieces together. And instead, the impression that I walk away from this movie with is, well, Kate, that's great. You were never going to get a guy from the modern era because career stuff, because trauma, because you're not that into it, but you could get the impossible ghost boyfriend. And isn't that a lesson for all of us? If you hit your 30s and it's still not happening, or you're still not into it, go hit up a haunted house.
Yeah, I think that is one of the interesting things about the ghost boyfriend mythology, that the way that they've set Daniel up makes interesting is that Daniel, because he has a physical form, can interact physically with Kate. And that in some ways means that they lose some of that intensity or drive, because she could just like make out with this guy, and frankly at the end of the movie, right at midnight, as she thinks that he's about to disappear from her arms, she seems kind of good with that. She's like, oh, this was a nice makeout sesh, and I guess we'll never know, and maybe I'll see him again next year. But she just doesn't have that kind of need to grab onto it. I'm sitting on my couch gesturing at someone grabbing something, and she loses that intensity and that drive that comes with feeling like you're running out of time. She just doesn't have a driving force that I ever saw.
Yeah, I think that's a well-made point. The thing about Daniel actually being like corporeal and like being touchable is that it's almost like too much like a fan fiction in that regard. Like you're right, it loses that artful tension of like, I love him, but he's a mist. I love him, but he's like a fantasy. He's a vision. No, he's there. And I laughed every single time that Kate was like, Daniel, don't come into my room at night. Daniel, don't open my door. Daniel, don't stand in the doorway like that. I mean, it's just so, to me, it just felt so clear that she was saying, like, don't stand in my doorway. Stand in my doorway. Don't watch me while I sleep.
no, watch me while I sleep. It was just, it had that sort of wish fulfillment quality that is a little bit too easy. I think you're right.
Yeah, I will say one of the few things that I actually really enjoy about this movie is some of the kind of focus on food, because Daniel is corporeal and really leans into making the most out of his 12 days every year by eating delicious food. He There's a number of various points where they eat, and the one that actually stuck out to me is at one point he's making her breakfast and he puts down glasses of orange juice in front of them and they're talking about the mystery or whatever. The dialogue is really not important. Uh, and he puts down this delicious looking pastry in front of her and then a bowl of fruit at his place. I was like, dude, what are you doing? Eat the pastry. You're going to be back in hell or torment or nothingness, whatever it is that happens to you, in like 6 days. Eat a pastry.
Although to be a bit objectifying for a minute, like that is that it is just amazing the way that the contrast between the scenes where he's eating like an incredible amount of meat, it looks like, and grilled cheeses, and the scene where Kate accidentally, in scare quotes, bursts into his room while he's coincidentally shirtless and ironing his shirt, and then gets very mad at her for being in there and seeing him shirtless, so you can see exactly how ripped he is, which also feels a bit anachronistic for the 20s. Um, but I digress. Yes, he really should have eaten the pastry, as earlier he had eaten the grilled cheese. Indulge yourself, Daniel. Have sex with Kate. Why not? You only got 12 days.
And you don't seem to have a problem with it. You had sex with your fiance 100 years ago, which is how she got pregnant in the first place. Like, yeah, have sex with her. Have a little fun. Drink more. Eat a pastry. I think the other thing that, as someone who is interested in costuming and scene setting, that I thought a lot about in this movie when I wasn't engaged by the plot at all, was where did Daniel's clothes come from? He wears clothes that are not modern. It's not like he's borrowing them from Walter, who's the proprietor. But clothes don't last that long, and he changes outfits multiple times. So it's not like he just comes back to life in the outfit that he died in and wears that for 12 days, and so it's not being damaged by time because it goes off into the void with him. He has multiple suits and coats and different outfits, some of which are very nice. He's got some nice knits, a good sweater in there. But where did they come from? These are the things that a little mythology that kind of explains it would have been nice.
Although I do love the idea of Daniel coming back for the 12 Days of Christmas, the first time when Walter was the proprietor of the inn, and forcing Walter to order like deeply, deeply appropriate and specific period clothing from Etsy to like his insane standards because he's a grumpy ghost, and then that's why Walter like leaves him alone at Christmas because he's like never again gonna put in such a ridiculous Etsy order for him.
Yeah, and like lean into the fanfic of it. Like maybe he orders from crafters who are really committed to making period appropriate clothing for different events and things where people might want to wear period appropriate clothing. But there is no way that nice wool sweater lasted 100 years. Do all of his belongings just pop back into existence every year on the 14th?
And his French Canadian accent. I've actually this is funnily enough, this is one of the only rom coms I've seen more than once, which is so embarrassing. But every time I watch this, I am always struck by his French Canadian accent, and it just makes me laugh that part of the plot is that he had to run to Canada, and I keep thinking like, was that your cover story, bud? That you've been running to Canada for too long and you developed an accent? I see you. I see you. Illegal immigrant.
He does have a delightful accent, and I will say, in preparation for this, that I looked up the IMDb page of both of the lead actors, and apparently he speaks fluent French, which I think this movie really missed an opportunity to have sexy ghost boyfriend say something in French, anything. It doesn't really matter what, but that's another classic trope of hot man speaks French, women drop their pants. Like, why not?
What a horrifying mistake. That is the spookiest part of this whole movie, that they knew the entire time that he could speak French and they never made him do it. A nightmare. A true American nightmare. Well, Sarah, do you have any final thoughts about this intensely bland film?
I think that its intense blandness gives it a kind of charm in that if you're looking for a Christmas movie that requires absolutely no thought, absolutely no connection, that you could fall asleep halfway through, wake up 10 minutes before the end, and absolutely not care at all. This is a good choice. It gives us a taste of what it could have been, but never quite gets there.
It is not the spirit of Christmas that you may be looking for, but sometimes it'll do the business. That's the spirit of Christmas. All right, before we transition to our antidotes, I want to thank, as we do every week, our patrons on Patreon who are, seriously, you guys, honestly, what would we do without you? We would not do this podcast. That would be the truth. So a very Merry Christmas in July to Bob and Esther, Robert, Sean, M, and our new patron, Eternally Bored. Hi, Trey. Thanks, guys. Sarah, what is your antidote for the spirit of Christmas?
So my antidote for the spirit of Christmas is a movie called Christmas with a View, which falls into some of the same Christmas Hallmark standards, but I think is one of the few examples of an actually pretty enjoyable, in a true sense, not in a I'm watching this because I hate it and it's fun to mock sense, piece of this genre. It's a movie about some similar things, a career woman, but she actually has a reason for being career driven. She's personable. She has other traits besides having a job. She's got friends. She's got family. It's set in the mountains, this time out west in a ski town, but is fun. Has a decent cast. The leads have good chemistry, and it's a enjoyable, still light, fluffy, not serious plot driven movie, but I think one of the good examples of the Hallmark Christmas genre.
My antidote for the spirit of Christmas is a personal one, and I have to say this is all feel, no brain. There is no good political reason for it. There's no good feminist philosophy reason for it. My antidote is the 1995 classic Casper the Friendly Ghost. Why, you might ask? Well, it's because Casper was my first ghost boyfriend. I was totally enamored with him from the age of 4 onward. And the film also boasts Christina Ricci, Bill Pullman, and Devon Sawa at their career heights, and an unbelievable performance from Kathy Moriarty and her unforgettable voice. I love that film. It just fills me with joy, and I actually do think that the childlike romance between Christina Ricci's character and Casper the ghost is really lovely and sweet and innocent in nice and appealing ways that really speak to the appeal of the ghost boyfriend, that he's there and he's not, that he's non-threatening and safe and a lovely little fantasy, and sometimes that's okay. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being on the show with us and for celebrating Christmas in July.
Thank you for having me. It was a delight to get to come and talk to you about this crazy film and ghost boyfriends.
Yes. Shout out to all the ghost boyfriends out there on this, the 21st day of Christmas in July.
Thank you for listening to the RomCom Killjoys podcast. If you liked this episode, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at RomCom Killjoys. And if you'd like to support us further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/romcomkilljoys to gain access to exclusive bonus content. Our theme song is Lady Slut Hitchhike Love by the band A Giant Dog. And the song you're listening to now is a cover of one of my favorites, Baby Love, by Colin Langanis. Remember, Killjoys, don't let anyone kill your joy. Not a rom-com, not me, not anyone. See you next time.
I think that's what I'm going to say when I go back to grad school is like, hey, I have a big update, you guys. Over the summer, I got a ghost boyfriend. He doesn't have social media. It's very principled. So yeah, he's French Canadian. You wouldn't know him. He's been dead for 100 years. Every time I'm taking a selfie, he's like there in the background. It's sort of a presence thing. Like if you have a strong connection to the spirit world, like you can see it, but like otherwise, like sorry, he's just hovering at all times around me. Yeah, we're very happy.